The Howards is a 1998 novel written by Michael Cunnigham. It won the 1999 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, the 1999 P.E.N. Faulkner Award for Fiction, and was later made into an Oscar-winning 2002 movie of the same name, starring Nicole Kidman, Meryl Streep, and Julianne Moore. Michael Cunnigham was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1952 and grew up in California. Cunnigham is currently a professor of creative writing at Yale University. His most recent novels include A Home at the End of the World, Flesh and Blood, and The Land's End. Although Cunnigham is gay, he dislikes being referred to as a gay writer. While being gay greatly influences his work, he feels that it should not be his defining characteristic. The interlocking narratives of the Howards take place on a single day in the lives of its three female protagonists, who live in separate locations in time and space. Connecting these three women is Virginia Woolf's novel Mrs. Dalloway, whose original working title was The Howards. In the Sussex of 1923, we find Virginia Woolf herself, struggling with the construction of Mrs. Dalloway and trying to fight off mental illness in the form of painful headaches and persecuted voices. Meanwhile, we have Mrs. Laura Brown, a housewife in 1948 Los Angeles, who is reading Mrs. Dalloway, and who on this particular day is trying unsuccessfully to bake a cake for her husband, a war hero who is now settled into civilian life while looking after her sensitive young son. Then, in contemporary New York, we meet middle-aged socialite Clarissa Vaughan, preparing a party for her friend Richard, a gay poet who is dying of AIDS and who calls her Mrs. Dalloway because she reminds him of Clarissa Dalloway, the heroine of Woolf's novel. In Cunningham's book, it is one day in the life of each of the three central characters. In this way, he attempts to show the beauty and profundity of every day in every person's life, and conversely, how a person's whole life can be examined through the prism of one single day. Virginia Woolf, afraid of going mad but missing the sense of being alive, decides she must leave the suburban seclusion of her Richmond house and return to live in central London. She is incredibly sensitive to the world around her and unusually receptive to small details of her environment, which she believes have incredible significance. Her sensitivity makes her a great writer, but she also is subject to incredibly strong emotions that are set off by events that older people might not even notice. The prologue to the story describes Virginia Woolf in 1941 no longer able to maintain her mental balance, throwing herself in the river house. Mrs. Brown, suffering from depression and feeling herself a failure in her role as dutiful wife and homemaker, feels that something is wrong with her, but tries to convince herself that she is normal. She seeks comfort in books, specifically Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. Through reading, she can step out of her life and critically examine her own experiences. The subject matter of suicide also forces her to consider the idea that she wants to find a way out of her own life. In the end, Laura chose to leave and ultimately left her family to move to Canada. Clarissa, meanwhile, meditates on the lost promises of a kiss with Richard when they were both college students, and on the comfortable but somewhat emotionally flat life she now leads. Even though she questions some of her choices, at the end of the day she takes comfort in the idea that the life has meaning because of those hours that are filled with supreme, wonderful pleasure. The novel's three strands are brought together when Richard, like Woolf's character Septimus Smith, chooses to commit suicide rather than let the disease take him. And Clarissa, though she consoles the body, meets Richard's mother, who we discover is actually Mrs. Brown, now an old woman. In actual fact, the Howards both begins and ends with a suicide. What links the three female protagonists of Cunningham's novel is an acute sense of their own being, as it is lived from moment to moment, together with the feeling that they are each playing a role that does not reflect their true inner self. They are also, in their different ways, trying to create something perfect. In Clarissa's case, it is a party for her dying writer friend. In that of Mrs. Brown, a cake for her husband's birthday. For Woolf, it is the novel Mrs. Dalloway itself. In addition, The Howards concerns three generations of questionably lesbian or bisexual women. To some extent, the novel examines the freedom with which successive generations have been able to express their sexuality, to the public, and even to themselves. Cunningham's novel suggests, to some extent, that perceived mental illness can be a legitimate expression of perspective. Along with mental illness, the issue of suicide appears in all three storylines of the novel. Virginia and Richard eventually carry through with their considerations of suicide, while Laura opts out in favor of abandoning her family and creating a new life for herself elsewhere. The Howards is not exactly a rewriting of Mrs. Dalloway, although parts of it strongly echo and occasionally directly cite Woolf's own words. Cunningham adapts her technique to mirror the situations and lifestyles of his own American characters. In so doing, he utilizes and indeed magnifies several key aspects of Woolf's style, in particular free indirect monologue, the superimposition of different time periods, and the chance parallels which exist between the thoughts and destinies of different characters. The 2002 drama film, directed by Stephen Daldry, is an amazingly faithful screen adaptation. Cunningham said in an interview that he may be the only living American novelist who is entirely happy with what Hollywood has done to his novel. The film received 9 Academy Award nominations. The ceremony saw Kidman win the Best Actress award. It also received 7 nominations at the 6th Golden Globe Awards, winning the Best Drama Film and the Best Actress awards. The film's score by Philip Glass won the BAFTA Award for Best Film Music. There are some little differences between the movie and the novel. For example, the sequence when Virginia Woolf and her husband are arguing at the train station. It works much better in the film version when they're talking than in the novel, where most of it occurs in Virginia's head as she sits on a bench. In addition, some of the background characters, like Sally, Clarissa's lover, and Julia, Clarissa's daughter, are given more depth in the book than the movie, while Virginia's husband Leonard and her sister and nephews seem to get more time in the film. Although both the film and novel portrayed suicide effectively, the novel did more so. The first, most obvious instance is the prologue, in which Virginia Woolf commits suicide by drowning herself in a river. The next then would be Richard Brown's suicide by means of falling out of a window. The novel would hint at Laura Brown possibly committing suicide because of how trapped and constrained she felt, but ironically, Laura was the last of her family to live. She chose to run away, and that combined with a number of other factors led to Richard's suicide. The movie doesn't convey all of this, as well because it lacks the ability to do a sort of narrative to get inside the character's thoughts.
Leonard. Always the years between always.